This video focuses a little bit on the vice presidency. Obviously, the president is the person that is most recognizable within the executive branch, but the VP plays a role as well. Some things that you might see about the vice presidency on the AP test. It is important to know that the way in which the vice president is selected has changed throughout the course of American history. This is changed by the 12th Amendment. Initially, like if you read the original Constitution, like the way that the VP was selected was that it would just be the second place finisher in the presidential election. So up until the 12th Amendment is passed and then ratified in 1804, the first place finisher of the presidential election becomes president. Second place finisher becomes vice president. This clearly doesn't work once political parties form. We got away with this for the first couple presidential elections because there were no political parties. But then that changes. And then once there's political parties, this doesn't work anymore. So the new setup is basically a president and VP team from one party take on a president and VP team from another. Obviously, this works under modern circumstances. The old way would never work. The idea of having like a president of one party and the vice president from another party that was the second place finisher just doesn't work. So the idea of president and vice president from one party taking on the president and vice president from another party just makes more sense. In terms of the presidential powers, or vice presidential powers, there are some things in the Constitution that are the vice president's responsibility. The first is like hopefully one that they never have to do, which is being the person that takes over in case the president can't do it anymore. So we've had presidents that have been assassinated, presidents that have died, presidents that have resigned. If that's the case, the vice president takes over. And on this screen, you can see some of the VPs that had to take over because the president they were serving under died. You might be interested to see that there haven't been a ton of vice presidents that have gotten elected without having to fill in first, right? So you have John Adams, you have Martin Van Buren, you have Richard Nixon, George H.W. Bush, and Joe Biden. They were all able to get elected on their own without having to fill in for the president they were serving under. So it's not super common that the vice president gets elected on their own without having to fill in for the actual president. The second thing that the VP does is the VP is actually considered to be the president of the Senate. Um, that doesn't really mean much on a daily basis because the vice president is not actually in the Senate. What this basically means is that since there are 100 senators, the only thing that would really require the vice president to fulfill any duties within the Senate is to break a tie. It could be a 50-50 split, and then the vice president of the United States could then serve as the president of the Senate and cast the deciding vote. Over the course of American histories, there have been 293 tie-breaking votes cast by vice presidents from 37 different vice presidents. John Calhoun, who was the VP from 1825 to 1832, holds the record with the most at 31 tie-breaking votes. Kamala Harris is actually third all time at 26. So that's a lot of tie-breaking votes from our the current vice president of the United States. And then in terms of non-constitutionally explained like powers and responsibilities, like the vice president does some other things too that aren't actually like mentioned in the Constitution. The first is that the vice president like travels the country and supports the president's policies. You know, basically gives press conferences, holds meetings, talks to people, give interviews like on TV and through the media. So just kind of traveling the country, rallying support behind the president. This is not something that's necessarily in the Constitution, but something the vice president does. And the other thing is actually balancing the ticket. So the vice president basically is often used to like make up for some sort of deficiency that the president might have. So, for example, when a president is deciding to run for the office, they have to pick who their vice president is going to be to run with them. They put a lot of consideration into this. You don't want to pick somebody that's just like you. The ticket is like you and your partner, like running. You want to balance it out, right? So you don't want somebody that's the exact same person as you. Oftentimes, you can use your vice presidential selection to make up for some sort of perceived weakness. And to use the selection of the vice president to appeal to a group that maybe you're not super popular with. So it could be you might focus on experience or age or race or gender or the part of the country that the vice president is from or just like their ideology. If you're a little bit more moderate, maybe you pick somebody that's more conservative or more liberal. If you are from the north, maybe you pick somebody that is based in the south or out west. And in the case of the people on the screen, Joe Biden and Barack Obama, Biden served as Obama's vice president. This was an intentional selection by President Obama's team. One of the knocks against President Obama was that before he became president, he wasn't super politically experienced. He hadn't even served one term in the Senate, and he was considered to be relatively unexperienced for a president. Also, he was relatively young. So the way you balance the ticket is you find somebody to run with you as vice president that's considerably more experienced. Like Biden had been a senator for a really long time, someone that's a little bit more politically seasoned and kind of has just a bit more experience. So there are some important things the vice president does that are based in the Constitution, and there's some other things that are more just informal or traditionally based.